Today, we are going to continue our tour of West Virginia cemeteries as we visit and talk about the Woodlawn Cemetery of Fairmont, West Virginia. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? I'm the best Virginian. I do a little bit of West Virginia history and travel videos, sometimes delve into the paranormal and true crime, but today we're going to continue talking about West Virginia cemeteries and cemetery tourism as we talk about the Woodlawn Cemetery of Fairmont, West Virginia in Marion County. If this is something that interests you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you have any recommendations for historical cemeteries I should visit, let me know down in the comment section. So, the first burial at the Woodlawn Cemetery was one Joseph Hamilton on April 15th, 1875. He was found dead on the property where the cemetery is located today. It's believed he was killed when a gun he was carrying discharged while he was trying to climb over a fence on the property. I wish I could make more videos where I didn't have to talk about mysterious deaths and unsolved mysteries, but if that's something you like, you might like this video I did on the first unsolved mystery, unsolved murder in Wetzel County history, the murder of one John Jennings. The family that owned the property offered up a parcel of land for Joseph to be buried on, and that would eventually grow into the Woodlawn Cemetery as we know it today, a cemetery that has more than 11,000 residents buried there. In 1878, the nearby Presbyterian Church relocated its cemetery to the Woodlawn, and one of the new residents was Boaz Fleming, the founder of Middletown, which would eventually become known as Fairmont. As another just weird little tidbit of history, when they moved the Presbyterian cemetery, there was one straggler. In fact, this individual wouldn't be found until 1892 while they were doing excavating on the previous site of the old Presbyterian cemetery, and found this individual, and then their remains were relocated to the Woodlawn with everyone else. As you walk through the Woodlawn Cemetery, it's like walking through any other older cemetery. You're actually walking through history. You're seeing how monuments and customs have changed over time. It's a very interesting way not just to learn about local history, but how different time periods of different communities shaped larger moments in history. It's really like walking through a history museum, an architecture museum, and a recreational park all at the same time, and that was actually done on purpose. In the early 1900s, there was a movement to make cemeteries more like parks. Everything from how the sections were partitioned off to how the roads transverse the cemetery. It was done to make it feel more like a park and like a place where people would go to relax and to get together and to congregate. And there are still signs of this time period. So the Woodlawn has several benches spread throughout the cemetery for people to sit and relax on. Along with, at one time, and we're going to talk about this later, the cemetery had several large trees for providing shade for people walking through the cemetery. I have seen cemeteries that have also incorporated like checkered boards into some of these benches. It's crazy to think there was a time where people would come together in cemeteries to play checkers, to play chess. Another thing I've noticed at a couple cemeteries, there's rules prohibiting the selling of food within cemetery grounds. In some cases, I think it's like within 100 feet of the cemetery. Some cemeteries outright ban food or beverages within the cemetery, and it comes from this time period where people would literally go to cemeteries to have picnics. Personally, I got into cemetery tourism in early to mid 2020, and it was during the onset of the pandemic. You know, the museums closed, the gym closed. If you wanted to go somewhere, you know, see some art, see some architecture, take in some local history, and get some exercise in the process, really your only option was going to some of these older cemeteries. And it was weird, especially going from last year, or 2 years ago, 2020 now. Some of the first cemeteries I visited where I could just walk around and be the only person there, definitely the only person there with a camera in the 3-4 hours I would visit one, to in 2021, I went to the Woodlawn. I think I saw 3 or 4 dozen people. I wasn't even the only weirdo taking pictures and wiping off monuments to be able to read them better. There were other individuals doing that. There were people just walking around. There were people sitting on the benches reading. It's really weird how the pandemic allowed people to rediscover some of these old pastimes, like visiting cemeteries. And a lot of the people that I've seen and talked to at some of these places, they're more than willing to share their knowledge of where some of the historical markers are, what some of the best walking paths are, things like that. So it's very interesting to get into cemetery tourism, as it has kind of slowly come back into style as a pastime. So you might be wondering, why should you consider visiting the Woodlawn in your next trip to the area, or if you live nearby? Well, the Woodlawn is the final resting place of the father of West Virginia, one Francis Pierpont, who was a Fairmont lawyer who would become the governor of reorganized Loyalist Virginia, and he would play a major role in the creation of West Virginia as a state. Also, the cemetery is part of the West Virginia Civil War trails, and there are plaques depicting not just Francis Pierpont's role in West Virginia becoming a state, but also nearby in downtown Fairmont during the Jones raid. Pierpont's law library was burnt to the ground by Confederate raiders. The Woodlawn is the final resting place of not just the father of West Virginia, but 2 governors of West Virginia, these being A.B. Fleming and Matthew Mansfield Neely. Sam Toothpick Jones, a Major League Baseball player, and Ernest Bavely, one of the founders of the International Thespian Society, are also residents of the Woodlawn. And it's just a great place. There's a lot of great mausoleums, great Victorian era monuments, and it's really just a great place to spend an afternoon, but it's not without some of its own problems. So the Woodlawn was named because at one point it had many large trees throughout the lawn. It was a wood lawn. Over time, and we're talking about the cemetery has been around for 150 plus years, some of the trees had to be removed. If you've ever removed a tree or cut down a tree, let's say in your backyard, you know how for years to come the ground in the area can be a little bit spongy as the roots deteriorate and break down. Complicate that with the fact that cemeteries are semi-cavernous to begin with. Once you go down 5 to 8 feet, you run into the ground being a little bit softer, a little bit more unstable anyways, because that's where the people are buried. And especially in a lot of these super old cemeteries, a lot of people weren't buried in concrete vaults, so the ground's already kind of a little bit softer to begin with, and then you add the trees to it, and then you add a several 100-pound gravestone on top of it. You can see in some of these pictures where monuments are starting to lean a little bit. Some have completely toppled over, and that is just a side effect of some of these older cemeteries, especially older cemeteries with trees in them. Also, I saw a lot of groundhogs, which they probably aren't making the situation any better. But with that being said, just be respectful, be careful with your footing. Definitely don't walk directly over any of the graves or climb on any of the monuments. Again, 99% of the time you shouldn't do that anyways, just as a respect issue. But especially in some of these older cemeteries where the ground can kind of be unstable anyways, you run the risk of one of these several 100-pound markers falling on you. And also, if there's any like vengeful skeletons, like they could just reach up and just. But with that being said, this was a little bit of a look into the Woodlawn Cemetery. I hope you learned something today. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead, hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't yet, and West Virginia history, West Virginia travel is something that interests you. But until next time, stay wild and stay wonderful, and I'll talk to you later.